Well, I'm going to introduce our presenters so we can go ahead and get going. This is the fourth year that Bonnie, Casson-Deweese, and Susie Valise have presented on advising undocumented students. Susie comes from a background in both higher education and financial aid at Texas A&M College Station and the University of Texas at Austin. Prior to becoming a college counselor at KIPP Generations Collegiate, Susie got her first taste of life on the other side of the desk at Aldine ISD, where she served as a college counselor for 5 years. Prior to becoming director of college counseling at KIPP Generations Collegiate in 2012, Bonnie comes from a background of more than 7 years in higher education. She started her recruitment work at the University of Oklahoma in Norman and continued in Houston at the University of St. Thomas. Both hold the topic of education equity near and dear to their hearts and serve a school where 11% of the students are undocumented. Ladies and gentlemen, Bonnie and Susie will be starting the presentation now, so welcome.
Hello, everyone. Excuse me. This is Bonnie. Thank you so much for coming or not coming, but viewing our webinar. Again, like we said, this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts. We do serve a population of 11% undocumented students, and we know that this is a hot issue, especially in the state of Texas, so it's important to be as informed as possible. Again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat area, and we'll be happy to get to them later on. All right. So this is just a rundown of kind of what we're going to go over today. We're going to ground ourselves in the federal and state laws. We'll then talk about deferred action and also kind of pending action in a lot of different states. Admissions, both public and private, and in-state and out-of-state. As well as college, major, and career options, financial aid and scholarships, and then we'll wrap up with a Q&A. All right. Okay, so we're going to start out by looking at the federal and state laws, kind of what has led up to what we are doing right now. The first thing we need to do is ground ourselves in a definition of what an undocumented student is. And so we're using, for this purpose, the Badger and Yale Lower 2006 definition, which states an undocumented student is a foreign national who, 1, entered the United States without inspection or with fraudulent documents, or 2, entered legally as a non-immigrant, but then violated the terms of his or her status and remained in the U.S. without authorization. Okay. So these are just some of the education laws that have come into effect. The first is from the 1982 Supreme Court ruling of Plyer v. Doe, which granted public education to all K-12 students. And then the IRA, or the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. It states that undocumented students shall not be eligible on the basis of residence within a state or a political subdivision for any post-secondary education benefit unless a citizen or national of the U.S. is eligible for such a benefit. And as we've seen, some states have actually changed that definition. They have actually changed the ability for students to either receive in-state tuition or be able to receive some sort of financial aid, as we do in the state of Texas, at least for now. So that brings us to Senate Bill 1528, which the student must have graduated from a Texas high school or received a GED, have resided in Texas at least 3 years leading up to graduation, lived in Texas in a year prior to enrollment in higher ed, and is, if not a U.S. citizen, they must agree to apply for permanent residency as a first opportunity. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the affidavit, and we'll go through that later on, basically agreeing that that student will become a U.S. citizen or apply for permanent residency. Now, in Texas, students who fall under SB 1528, they are able to get in-state tuition and state financial aid for public in-state schools. They're also able to, of course, apply for the TASFA, which is, that can be used at a variety of TASFA schools, including some that are private. And this kind of an addendum, as I'm sure many of you guys have heard, the Dreamers in Texas may be having a fight to uphold Senate Bill 1528. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who is newly elected, has openly opposed 1528 and opposed offering financial aid to undocumented students who are Texas residents. So this is something that is, it is current, it is in the news. As I was driving in today, I actually heard another news story on NPR basically talking about the executive order or executive action that President Obama put forth as a possible way of citizenship for undocumented men and women within the U.S. And how that it was basically overturned by a federal judge recently, and so they're thinking of ways that they're going to challenge that. So we know this is a hot topic. We know it's changing every single day. So we are, as of this morning, I was still trying to fix some things. So as we go through, we'll be able to address some of those things. Just so you know, there are a variety of states where in-state tuition is offered for undocumented students. As you see from this list continues to grow over the past 4 years. Over the last 4 years, that this list has grown, which is an awesome thing for us and the students that we serve. As you see, this year, for example, we've added Kentucky and I'm trying to remember the other one. We've added Kentucky to the list, and then Hawaii and Michigan are only some schools. So if you're looking at, and these are of course for in-state residents as well. These are a list of states that restrict or prohibit, and this list has also grown. As we see, there's a difference. There's the places like Alabama, or states who prohibit access to higher education, but may grant access to DACA grantees. With deferred action, a lot of these states have changed their policies, where if a student does actually get DACA, they may be able to get access to either higher education or may actually get in-state tuition if they are a DACA recipient. And we'll go through that process too. One of the newest states on this list is going to be Missouri, and they ban in-state tuition, but the grantees may pay in-state tuition at some institutions. And we'll go through DACA. DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And that's something that a lot of our undocumented students fit a certain criteria. And we'll go through in just a second all of the restrictions to that. This is a great visual. You can find it at the National Immigration Law Center website, but it's the current state laws and policies with access to higher education for immigrants. And you can see all over the state, based color-coded. You can see kind of what states do have policies, what states still don't have policies, and which states have policies that prohibit or give access to higher education or give access to financial aid. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is the DREAM Act. So it's the Development, Relief, and Education of Alien Minors. So the DREAM Act, I want to clarify, is not in actuality. It is not a real act. It has not happened. But I wanted to go ahead and let you guys know about this. That has been, we're still kind of working on. The major requirements: the age 15 or younger when they were brought to the U.S. They have to have lived in the U.S. at least 5 years, earned high school diploma or GED in the U.S., and be of good moral character, whatever that means. You'll see that a lot of the requirements for both the DREAM Act and for DACA have to do with having a good moral character. Generally, that means they, could not have been arrested or any of the things like that. And it's still ambiguous as to what that exactly means or how you quantify that. Students would have 6 years to earn a permanent residency status if they complete 2 years of higher education or complete 2 years of military service. And if you want some more information, you can visit the NACAC website. So basically, the DREAM Act is something, this is a amalgamation of a lot of different views of the DREAM Act. So basically, there have been so many different incarnations of what the DREAM Act really can be. This is just kind of an amalgamation of all of those things. This is what ideally a lot of dreamers are aspiring to get, and we're not quite there yet. All right. These are some different laws to consider when you're thinking about sending particularly your undocumented students who either do not have DACA or who do not have DACA or who are considering going out of state. These are some things that you should consider. First of all, undocumented immigrants in Texas are not eligible for a driver's license unless they have deferred action. If they do have deferred action, they are able to get a driver's license, and they are also able to get a working Social Security number, but only for employment purposes. It's not for financial aid or anything like that. The same with flying. So persons 18 or over must provide a valid state or federal ID to fly. So if you're thinking about sending a student, to a different state and they are undocumented and they do not have DACA, they may not be able to travel easily back and forth. You also have to consider what states is the student passing through in order to get to this other state, even if they are driving and someone else is operating the motor vehicle. So you have to think about protection for those students. Here's a little bit of information about DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The major requirements are that they will have arrived in the U.S. before the age of 16, resided in the U.S. for at least 5 years before June 15th, 2012, which is actually they're now going to push up that date. I don't know what the date is going to be, but it will be to help students who would fit into that requirement. So for example, we have a student here who does not fit the requirement, fit the requirement of being here before June 15th, 2012, but under the next version of DACA, he will be, so that he will be able to apply for it. They must currently be in school, have graduated high school, have a GED, or are honorably discharged veterans of the Coast Guard or Armed Forces of the U.S. They must not be convicted of a felony offense or a significant misdemeanor, multiple misdemeanors, or pose a threat to national security, and cannot be above the age of 30. If all of these things fall into place, then the student is able to apply for DACA. Some things to consider when you're advising students on whether or not they can apply for DACA is, one, please make sure that they are working with an attorney. A legitimate attorney. This is a huge issue, because whenever we have opportunities like this for students, we also have not so very nice people out there who want to take advantage of families. The cost for DACA is significant. So when you add attorney's fees or anything like that, or exorbitant attorney's fees, it becomes very, very difficult. The actual charge for DACA, I believe, is around $450, $460. And then when you add any sort of attorney's fees to it, it can be a lot. There are some great CBOs out there who are offering free immigration attorneys, free help with DACA. We Own the Dream being one of them. So definitely have your students, if money is an issue, leverage those outside resources. So there are some great opportunities. The first of all is it's a deferral or removal of removal for 2 years. So the student cannot be deported for 2 years. The 2-year renewable employment authorization, but they must show an economic necessity for employment. That's the key. And then with this, they can also get a valid employment Social Security number, a driver's license, and auto insurance, which is huge. But remember that Social Security number, when you get to the FAFSA, that does not apply. Their FAFSA will be rejected. So you want to make sure that they understand that Social Security number, as beautiful as those digits are not a path to citizenship and are not something that they can use to receive federal financial aid. There are limitations to this, of course. So again, it is not a pathway to citizenship. It does not qualify the student for federal student aid. filling an application when not eligible may actually result in deportation. And that's where having the attorney is so very, very, very important. Having the attorney who is familiar with the process. I mean, we know it's the government. I mean, we're all in the process of probably filling out our taxes right now. They don't make things like this very easy. So having someone to walk through the process and make sure that all of your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted is absolutely essential to the process. The renewal policy is the same as the initial application and just as costly. So you must, when we advise our students, especially our undocumented students, we actually talk about the cost as being part of what they're going to have when they go to college. So we know that student is likely going to have to apply for DACA or renew DACA at least once or twice while they're in college. So we add that roughly $1,000 to the money that they're going to need while they are going through the college process. And because, again, we're talking about the U.S. government, and they like to make things really complicated, the renewal must be done at least 120 days before expiration. So that's 4 months, but no more than 150 days before expiration, which is 5 months. So somewhere in that beautiful window of 4 to 5 months, or 4 months or less, and 4 and 5 months, you need to go ahead and do the application. Again, it's still the same cost. I would still strongly encourage, even if it is a renewal, to go ahead and have that student work with a CBO or with an attorney to go through that process. All right. And here are just some deferred action resources: the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Resources, the Department of Homeland Security, and the National Immigration Law Center, all of which have great opportunity for students who are applying. Just to respond really quickly to what question, which application may result in deportation?
A DACA application.
A DACA application. So it's a DACA application that is either incomplete or fraudulently done, or
they don't qualify.
They don't qualify. So those can result in deportation. All right. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it over to Miss Susie Valise.
Hi, everybody. All right, so I'm going to cover admissions, and then we're going to move on to the sexy financial aid section. So in admissions here in Texas, it is wonderful that we have SB 1528, because that really provides an opportunity for our students to apply as Texas residents, meaning that they are not considered international students when it comes to tuition. So community colleges and four-year schools here in Texas would go along with that. So the additional form that students have to submit with their admission application is their affidavit of intent. So this affidavit is basically saying that they promise to apply for a permanent residency at the earliest opportunity that they're eligible for. And it does need to be notarized. So make sure that you're telling your students that it can't just be signed by themselves. They have to be in front of a notary. And there are ways that you can get things notarized without having to pay. A lot of the times, these students think that they have to go to Fiesta or whatever and pay for each of the affidavits that they're sending out, because it does have to be an original sent to every school for the admissions office to review. So when it comes to Texas private schools, it is a little bit different, because private school does not necessarily have in-state or out-of-state fees, but they do have international student fees. So there is a difference between how students are some private universities will view the student as a Texas resident, and then they may have some international student requirements, like they might make them buy health insurance or something like that. They might make them be listed as an international student but still receive in-state tuition, like they'll add a tag to that student. Is considered an international student. They sometimes will be asked by the university to provide a proof of financial ability to pay. So a real true international student, let's say from a different country, is applying to a Texas school, they would be required to provide that proof saying, yes, we can afford to pay for this private university's tuition. And so sometimes those universities, even in Texas, will say, as a you know, an undocumented student, you may still have to fill out this form, which can be a real problem because those students more than likely do not have the ability, the financial ability to pay for that tuition. Out-of-state private schools, it's a little bit different. A lot of times they are classified as international students because the student, let's say they're coming from Texas, does not necessarily meet their in-state residency requirements. So they may have to consider schools that are more generous when it comes to academic aid, when it comes to institutional aid. And I have had students who have gone to private schools out of state. Again, this is usually a student who is a very strong academically has very strong resume, will probably be very, very competitive when it comes to the other students who are applying to that university. So it's possible, but again, the cost is very high and it's very limited. So it is something that you have to have a realistic conversation with those students. Okay, so college and career considerations. We wanted to include this slide because we wanted to make sure that students are being realistic about their situation. So if a student is very strong, I always tell the student to, you know, to go for it and to apply and to have those options ready. If the student is not as strong, they need to be realistic about what their options are. They may not be able to compete against someone who's applying in a very competitive applicant pool to a private school or something like that. So always advertise your students that community college or junior college is a good option and may in some cases be the only option. The cost is a lot lower, so it is much more affordable. Distance from home and method of travel. With DACA, it is a little bit easier if the student does qualify for a deferred action, that they are able to fly and travel and they are able to not worry about being deported. But it's something that the student has to consider. For example, if a student is in Houston and they're traveling to South Texas, there are security checkpoints, they will ask for their documentation, and so they have to be sure that they're going to be safe whenever they're traveling. So let's see. Majors and career considerations. When a student is considering a major, it's really important that they think ahead. There may be certification requirements, licensing requirements, let's say to be a nurse or to be a student who is trying to go to law school, trying to pass the bar exam. There are certain things that they're going to have to be able to provide in order to get that certification. So they may have to have a background check, have a proof of citizenship in order to continue in that career. And so every student should take it upon themselves, or we should encourage them to research that career before they actually commit to it, because they may hit a roadblock, which would be a very tough situation. You have a degree, even though you're undocumented, and now you're in a situation where you can't work because you can't get that last certification passed. So you also have to consider, again, a realistic conversation, and I've had this tough conversation with my students before. Think about the possibility of maybe having to return to the student's country of birth, which may not even be a country they're familiar with or a language that they're familiar with, but it is something that might be what they have to do. So you have to be realistic and say, you know, think about how your career could be marketed in your home country as well, because even having a high school degree might really make you very marketable in the country you're from. Or having a 2-year associate's degree, and of course having a 4-year degree. So think about those career options. All right, so now my favorite part, which is FAFSA and TASFA. So FAFSA and TASFA. Of course, TASFA is for Texas schools because it qualifies you for state financial aid. On the TASFA at the very front, they have this box, which basically will tell you whether or not the student is supposed to be filling out the TASFA or the FAFSA. So you would read through it, check off, you know, if they have to do FAFSA or TASFA. Any of those checks are in the TASFA column, then they'll have to end up doing the TASFA. And there are some students that, for example, Temporary Protective Services, TPS from El Salvador, these students are documented. They're not necessarily citizens or permanent residents, but they don't qualify for the FAFSA. So in that case, even though they are not necessarily considered undocumented, they still have to do the TASFA. So there are some situations which are a little bit different and a little bit tricky. All right, so the TASFA. The TASFA is pretty straightforward. You can download it from College for All Texans, which is a great website to use as a resource. They can type it on the computer and then print it out so that it looks more professional, or they can handwrite it and fill it out. The idea is that a student will fill out a TASFA for every school, and then make copies for every school that they're going to send their financial aid information to. They send it to the Office of Admissions of each university along with other documents. So with the IRS retrieval tool nowadays on the FAFSA, a lot of universities are asking TASFA students to also send in IRS transcripts for verification as well. So a student may, for example, get together all their documents. They'll have a completed TASFA, they'll have their 1040 from their parents and W-2s, and they'll have their tax transcript from the IRS. And that's something that each individual university will decide what it is that they require. They make a packet, they put it in an envelope, they address it to the Office of Financial Aid at the university, and they send one packet off to each school. TASFA step. So it's implied, but you have to say this. Some students and some parents do not file taxes or have not filed taxes. So you need to have a tough conversation with some parents sometimes, because in order to do TASFA, you do have to have some sort of tax return or 1040. Unless the parent or student or family does not necessarily have to file taxes, and that deals with IRS income levels. So income, the IRS requires individuals who earn $9,750 as head of household, $12,500, or is married filing jointly as a couple to make $19,500. So there's thresholds, and if they're below the threshold, then they can still do the TASFA without doing federal income tax. How do you do federal income tax if you're undocumented? There's a taxpayer identification number that a person can apply for, and it's basically like a Social Security number, but it's only used for IRS and tax purposes. There are ways that you can, like I said, if you don't have to file taxes, you can still do the TASFA if you're under that level and income level, but you have to be very explicit of how you're surviving on that income. So on the TASFA, it'll ask specific questions. So, you know, rent, how is it paid, and how are you paying for food, and how are you surviving? So a lot of cases, some parents are, or some students are living with family members, and their family members are documented, and that's how they have income, or they're not paying rent because they live with family, things like that. If it is a male student between age 18 and 25, the student must register with Selective Service. If a student has DACA, they will have a Social Security number, but that Social Security number actually will not be accepted by the Selective Service registration online. So they'll have to print out the Selective Service registration form, fill it out by hand, and mail it in. If I were you as a counselor, I would definitely suggest to you to make sure that the student, the male student between 18 and 25, saves a copy of that Selective Service confirmation when it comes back. I even tell my students to save the actual registration form just in case. Some financial aid offices will not process the TASFA until after it is documented, or they have something on file to say that that student has registered for Selective Service. So even undocumented students have to do that Selective Service registration. All right, state financial aid. So the TASFA, what does it qualify you for? It basically will put you into consideration for any state financial aid. So any state grants, any state funding, which of course we know is not stable and can fluctuate based on the Texas legislature, and in past years has really disappeared. So you have to be sure that that the student understands there may not be a lot of state grants that are available to them. So that money is limited. To see what other types of state financial aid or state grants are available, again, College for All Texans is really detailed, has a lot of information. So go ahead and check that website out. Okay, let's see. For students who are doing the CSS profile, as you know, there are some schools that are require students to do CSS profile instead, in addition to the FAFSA. In that case, there is a CSS profile that they can access online, and there is an international student federal aid application as well. For this case, if the university is asking for a CSS profile, I strongly suggest that the student contact the financial aid office and get very specific details about what it is that they want. They may not want the CSS profile from them if they know they're undocumented. They may want that and then other documents. So that's very specific to every institution, especially when it comes to those private or very competitive or very selective universities. Scholarships. So it's really important for students to be realistic, again, I say, about state funding, because it's just not, it's not enough a lot of times. So we encourage our students to do as many scholarships as possible, both institutional and private. Institutional, of course, would be your Apply Texas application for scholarships for A&M or UT or Texas State or wherever it is they're applying. And even outside, and even institutional scholarships that are not on Apply Texas, like Sam Houston has their Scholar X application, and SFA has one as well. What a student needs to do is look for what the criteria is as far as citizenship or permanent residency. If it is not listed as a requirement on the scholarship, then the student should be able to apply for it. If it's not listed or it's not clear, have the student call that organization and ask them, can I still apply for the scholarship if I'm not a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident? And if they say that it's okay, encourage them to apply if they qualify. So a student can find scholarships in a lot of different ways. One of the great organizations out there that releases a scholarship list every year is MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. And they have a really, really comprehensive list that's on their website that they can fill out, or that they can use to look for scholarships. Latino College Dollars is another organization that lists scholarships that they can apply for on their own. And then every organization that offers a scholarship, ask if they require it, and if they don't, take advantage of that scholarship. Again, you have to be realistic. If a student is not very strong academically, it's going to be difficult for them. If you're a counselor, you know a lot of scholarships have certain GPA requirements, and most of the thresholds for those are 2.5 or higher, 3.0 or higher. And so a student who's lower than that in their GPA is going to have a difficult time finding scholarships that they qualify for. So again, it's a kind of a sad story, or a sad situation when a student is really low in their academics and is undocumented, because there's not as much help for them. So the last slide is just basically opening it up to Q&A. Yeah. But I do want to say a couple things that pertain to financial aid before we go into Q&A that are not necessarily for undocumented students, but for students in general. So if a student is documented and they're doing the FAFSA, but their parents are undocumented, their parents may have that taxpayer identification number, but they should absolutely not put that on the FAFSA. What a student has to do in that case is have the parent's social security number listed as all zeros. It will say check for errors, there's an error, but they simply have to continue clicking to go on in the FAFSA for it to override that. And what will happen at the very end is that parent won't be able to get a PIN number either to sign the FAFSA. So the student will have to sign the FAFSA with their own PIN, and then they'll have to click on the print signature page, have their parent physically sign the form, and then mail it to the federal, to the FAFSA address. So that's a situation that is pretty common. The student may be a citizen or a permanent resident, but the parent is not.
Yeah, and something also, I think that everything that we were talking about resounds with the first thing is to really get to know your students. As we know as counselors, that building the relationship is absolutely key. You have to understand that a lot of students have grown up, especially undocumented students, have grown up with an idea that being undocumented is something that you need to keep quiet. It's something that you don't share with other people. So the first thing is absolutely building the trust of the student to where they feel that they can easily talk to you about their situation. If it is possible, and talk to your front desk and try as much as possible to start targeting undocumented students, or at least know how many undocumented students that you will be dealing with as the year goes on. Because every single year, it never fails. Unless you are planning ahead, you're going to have a student that you are that you are working with and schools on their list, and they know exactly where they're going to go, and you find out they're undocumented, which changes the entire conversation. There are schools out there that are wonderfully open to undocumented students, and they're all over the country. And it's a matter of also being able to investigate some of those schools that are very friendly to undocumented students. Who there's even some schools out there that offer 100% need met for undocumented students, and these are private liberal arts schools. So it's a matter of doing your homework as a counselor. So knowing what your population is, knowing what students need the extra help, and building those relationships to be able to work with that family and work with those students. Because there are a ton of opportunities out there, and depending on the way legislation goes, hopefully more opportunities for students. But it's not just you have to stay in town and you have to go to the local community college, or you have to go to the local state school. There are other options out there, and we are, at least as of right now, I know this could change, in any minute, but at least right now in the state of Texas, we are very fortunate to have some state aid to be able to offer to those students. So do you want to?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to scroll up to the first couple of questions, and then we'll go from there answering questions.
Or Mickey, did you write down the question?
Actually collected all the questions.
Oh, okay.
That's awesome.
I can go ahead. Again, this is Mickey Saloma from SMU's Lyle School of Engineering. I heard that my welcome was cut off a little bit. I wanted to thank Prep Talk and, of course, Bonnie and Susie for this great presentation. I've got a couple of questions already. The first one is, if the students are at an early college high school and getting a 2-year degree in addition to high school diploma, would this qualify for the higher education requirement of the DREAM Act?
Since the DREAM Act isn't actually a law yet, it would really depend. I mean, the DREAM Act that we defined on our presentation is based on what the proposal is, or the consensus is among those who want to propose it. So what actually gets passed, as you probably know, is always changed by the Texas legislature, the U.S. legislature. So it could and it could not. We don't know because it's not on paper yet.
Yeah, but provided that again they meet the date requirements of when they came into the country, they could be able to apply for DACA. As far as the higher ed requirements, it really depends on what school that they're going to continue their studies in. So if it's an early college, high school, and they're gaining an associate's degree, as we know, we ideally want 100% of the credits to transfer, but that doesn't always happen that way. So only a select number could transfer depending on what the student's eventual major is, and a variety of things. And most schools, at least on the private sector, view those students coming in as first-year freshmen anyway. So even with the number of credits that they would bring in. But thank you.
So someone had posted where they can, asking where they can get the affidavit form for the students. I believe that if you have that very same question, if you look at the chat feature there on the bottom left of your screen, Ivana Kripa posted a link to it. It's a Yahoo document, but that's where you can get the affidavit for those of you that had asked that question. And next question for Bonnie and Susie: does a transfer student need to present an additional affidavit?
So I want to just jump off of what you were talking about before, just kind of tell you what we've done here that's really actually helped with the affidavits, is that we have both become notaries. That was a huge help. It was definitely worth the $80 investment. Take it off your taxes, but it definitely helps a lot of our families who accounts or don't have easy access to be able to get to reach a notary. So becoming a notary has definitely been a huge help for us. But to go with the transfer student question, yes, I believe they do have to. You want to check with the schools individually, but if they are filling out the TASFA, then they definitely would need to do the affidavit.
All right, next question. Have y'all ever run into a situation that the student submitted a form because the social was empty, their form was not found?
A form in what sense? A selective service form, or?
I think it was during the selective service.
I'm trying to scroll back.
I haven't had that. I mean, if a male between 18 and 25 is doing the selective service registration and they fill out the paper form, from my experience, I don't think that's, if they left the Social Security part empty, I don't think that's caused any issues. I would have heard by now.
We would have heard by now if there were any issues, at least of this year. And we had a number of students who had to fill that out. So, nothing specifically if the social was blank. I don't know if maybe if something else was blank on the form. But
excellent. Next question. In your experience,
but if they do have their DACA social, if they do have their DACA social, they should put it.
All right. In your experience as high school counselors, do most or many Texas private universities award undocumented students merit scholarships?
It depends on the school. Honestly, it depends on the school. It's if you look at the TASFA list, the TASFA list will give you the best idea of which schools do. I wish I could say that there was a rhyme or reason for which select to, which not. I know that some universities that directly compete with each other for students, one will accept a TASFA, one won't. As we know with private universities, it's really up to them and to their choices. There are schools that are particularly friendly, and they view undocumented students as simply in-state residents who happen to be in-state residents who graduated from an in-state high school, and so they're able to get both academic and financial aid. When I was at the University of St. Thomas, for particularly high-flying students, we were able to offer, roughly a full ride to a number of students who are undocumented who fit the requirements of both academic and financial aid. But it's also getting that TASFA in early too. I mean, as we know, that money goes very quickly. So this is the prime time TASFAs need to be getting done.
Median priority deadline for FAFSA is really, really big.
Yes. So they're fighting for not necessarily the same money, but they're fighting each other within the state of Texas to get what little bit of that kitty that is available. So.
The next question comes from Eric Watson. And he wrote, worst case, if Texas decided to cut these kids out, and Texas ends up looking like Alabama or South Carolina, where they are denied access to higher education, are there any conversations being had about this with the new state leadership? I mean, you addressed a little bit about the lieutenant governor being opposed to the DREAM Act. Is there any more? I mean, is this look like a certainty that this may be off the table?
Not a certainty. But, I mean, it has been on the chopping block for a while. It was a big part of his campaign. And as we know, immigration reform is a huge hot topic. And when we get to more extreme, we have the moderate conservative and we have the extreme conservative. And when we have, we're trying to bend the two, it becomes difficult. We know the lieutenant governor is, more powerful than the governor in the state of Texas. So when it comes to the legislation being put through, I think it's something that will most likely hit the table. I think with any political party, it's also who their constituents are, who are they trying to appease, and they're, I'm sure, thinking forward to the next presidential election too, and what kind of climate that they want to have. I don't want it to go onto the table, but I feel like it will, just given the current, just given the current climate. I think that it's definitely something. Please write your state legislature. Please write your state congressman, your local congressman, and speak your mind. If it is removed, it becomes a different conversation. We need to start thinking about, then we really have to start having those conversations about two-year schools, or less expensive four-year schools, even for the high-flying students. And there are still, for the really high-flying students, of course, there are still schools like McAllister that meet 100% of need. There are still, and what's great is that small private schools throughout the country are starting to have conversations about changing the way that they're thinking about undocumented students, which is a huge step forward. Now, that's not going to be a match for every single kid. As Susie talked about, those students with the lower GPAs, or those bubble kids who may have a 3.0 and a 20 ACT, and aren't going to get the major money from those private universities, and may not get and won't be able to get financial aid. So we'll have to start thinking about that as we move forward.
Which brings actually a great point. I promise I don't want to make this sound too much like a big TACAC commercial, but all TACAC members received an email this morning about a town hall rally and advocacy day going on the south steps of the Capitol in Austin on March 12th. If you're interested in that, if you did not receive that email and you're interested in more information, please feel free to email me. On the chat section, I will put my email address so I can send you this information. We had one more question. I heard, and this is from Doris Graves. She said, I heard you say, inform the front office to build a relationship with undocumented students. Asking a student if they are undocumented, is that legal or, asking a student if they are undocumented, is that illegal or confidential?
That's a slippery slope. Yes, you definitely don't want to go outright with a student that you don't have a relationship with and say, by the way, are you undocumented?
So the way I would approach it, and I think what we're referring to the front office for, is some secretaries at certain schools have notary licenses. So in that case, what I mean is having a relationship with that person who is able to notarize. Mm-hmm. So in my old schools, when I worked at Aldine, one of our secretaries was the one who would notarize everything. And what I would do is just walk with the student to the front office and have them notarize it with me standing there, so that it wasn't, me outing the student necessarily. Mm-hmm. But again, it's about having a strong relationship and being able to say, I'm here to help you and I'm not trying to get you in any trouble.
Yeah, and knowing your kids, whether it's also, our kids here are very open and we have a pretty small class, but at larger high schools, it may be, even if you wanted to sponsor a Dreamers Club or something like that on your campus, that's not necessarily targeting students, but also getting kids to think proactively about their future. Because the worst thing is if you have a student their senior year who comes up to you, and we have a student like this who has that 1.8 GPA, who is undocumented, and whose options are severely limited, both because of their status, unfortunately, but also because of the choices that they made their 9th through 11th grade year. So in building those relationships, not necessarily like pinpointing or targeting kids and like creeping up around hallways and trying to grab them and like, here, you're undocumented kind of thing. You definitely don't want to do that. But it's just about building a relationship, whether it is through thinking creatively, like doing a Dreamers Club, or doing having a CBO host a night, like a DACA night, or have an immigration attorney come to one of your financial aid nights, or having a CBO come to one of your financial aid nights. That's a really great way to start building that relationship and building that trust. And both Susie and I added our email address and phone number for any contact information any questions that you may have that come up. We're happy to answer them.
Hi, everybody.
Well, it looks like those were all the questions. First and foremost, I wanted to thank Bonnie and Susie for taking their time to put this together. We really hope that you thought it was very worthwhile. I know that it's been posted on the chat, or the question's been asked on the chat site, but this will be available on TACAC's YouTube channel and on the TACAC website. Once we get that all posted, we'll go ahead and email all of you that attended with information with those links. So thank you very much for joining us, and I know that we'll be doing more webinars throughout the year, so please feel free to come back, and if you have any suggestions on any topics, please let us know. Again, I'm Mickey Saloma, and I put my email in the chat. Any suggestions that you have or recommendations, we'd love to hear them. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.